to Views on News. I am Jawad. Tehami. Federal Information Minister Ataullah Tarar says, let me quote him, Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf is spreading fake news and false propaganda to hide its failed attempt of disrupting peace in the federal capital and sabotaging the national economy. Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf has failed to present any video evidence to prove their claim, unquote. Likewise, Punjab's Information Minister Asif Bokhari says, let me quote her, the propaganda cell of Pakistan Tehreek-e-Insaf is desperately trying to sell lies and search for dead bodies. Strict action will be taken against those spreading fake news and propaganda, unquote. When we talk about the constitutional provisions, the Constitution of Pakistan gives the right of freedom of expression and speech and right to information to every citizen of Pakistan, but with reasonable restrictions. Article 19 and 19A provide for this. We'll be talking about what are those thin lines where this particular freedom of expression could cross a certain line and become misinformation or disinformation. We'll be taking the analysis from our esteemed panel of guests regarding these constitutional provisions. Also, with the rapidly evolving dynamics in terms of dissemination and consumption of information because of the newer media platforms, it has become critically important to address the challenges like fake news, disinformation, and false propaganda. What are these challenges and how we can fight these challenges? Are there any measures which are being taken by the authorities? We have most recently seen an effort on the part of the Australian government that it has imposed a ban on the use of social media for the under 16s. What does that basically signify? Is that the only solution in order to address the challenges because of the newer or the digital media platforms? We'll be trying to delve deeper into all these aspects, and for that we are honored to be joined in the studio by Mr. Farhan Bokhari. He's senior analyst. Mr. Bokhari, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. And also in the studio, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Malik Asif Mial. He's a communication expert. Mr. Mial, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. On Skype at the same time, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Tasadduq Gilani, he's social media analyst. Mr. Gilani, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. We really appreciate that. Let me begin the discussion with you, Mr. Bokhari. Now, let's start with the constitutional provisions, the Article 19 and 19A of the Constitution. The Article 19 talks about the right of every citizen to the freedom of expression and speech. Where does that freedom of expression and speech turn dangerous? Where does that enter into a negative territory?
It's a very difficult call, and it's a challenge which not only we in Pakistan are confronting. This is a debate, a discussion, a challenge which faces many other countries around the world, because let's not forget, in the last 30 years, the entire international environment has changed. 30 years ago, we did not have some of the platforms which are widely used today, WhatsApp, other mechanisms. Internet was far from as prevalent as it is today. So it's a very different environment. Some call it the most vital revolution ever to surround humankind. So that's the overall sort of context. And I say that the balance is a hard one, because on the one extreme you have certainly have legitimate security interests, national interests. Back in the 70s came out a book by Australian journalist titled The First Casualty. And the opening line was very interesting. The opening line was, in war, truth is the first casualty. Now, 50 years later, today, we are discussing that very sort of theme which was picked up there. On the other extreme, there are people who would like to have completely unfettered use of the information platforms. And of course, there comes a point in time when complete unfettered access, use, cannot be allowed, because there is a danger, and there have been instances of the platforms that we are discussing here having been used for different activities, including some criminal activities. So the question is, where do you draw the line? Where do you balance? And I think that is a question which must be addressed by functionaries of the state, including the parliament. But it's a question that also needs to be addressed by intellectuals, by society at large. And without going off on a tangent, without going away from the gist of your question, I think it's a complicated one, and there are no easy answers here.
No easy answers, but when we specifically try to analyze the contents of this particular Article 19 of the Constitution of Pakistan, there are certain reasonable restrictions which have already been mentioned very clearly in that, which include the glory of Islam or the integrity, security or the defense of Pakistan or any part thereof, friendly relations with the foreign states, public or decency or morality, or in relation to contempt of court, commission of or incitement to an offense. So are these only restricted areas, and other than those anybody can talk about anything? Am I correct in understanding what these mentions are? Or are there other areas as well which could constitute the dangerous territory?
You have mentioned some very obvious ones, and no one can disagree with you on these areas. National interest, national security, morality, religion certainly is a very, very tricky one, and one that has to be tackled very carefully. Because if you're irresponsible, then there's a very grave danger, a likely danger of wider repercussions, wider fallout. And so the question is, do you want to allow that? On the other hand, what do you say to those who argue, sometimes convincingly, sometimes not, that there should be freedom? But my own personal view is that freedom must come with a certain degree of responsibility. The question is exactly where do you draw the line?
Okay. Mr. Mial, what's your understanding what this freedom of expression is, and how does this freedom of speech and expression might go into a dangerous territory?
Thank you very much. First of all, I'll just start off with like certain whistleblowers when it comes to technology. For example, when we see certain like galvanization of this technology, everybody was very happy that now, there will be more freedom, people will be able to talk freely and all that. So initially, perhaps they did not think about this thing, that it is going to affect societies, nations in such a negative way. The way it's happening right now, for example, we have got the most powerful nation right now, like Americans. Even in recent election, before the election, there were like 2 videos. They just got like very much viral, and even FBI had to, warn Americans that come on, don't go for this. Just look at this nation which they've got the hub of technology, Silicon Valley there, and there are top-notch 5 American big giants. They are sitting there, and currently they are facing. So it means like this disinformation and how it is going to affect. Perhaps in the start nobody thought that it is also going to affect us in this way as well. You just talked about certain provisions. Fine, there was a time.
Okay, so you've just used a couple of terms like disinformation, right? Let's try to simplify and let's try to develop the discourse from the simpler terminologies for our viewers towards some difficult things. Starting from the freedom of expression, what does that particular expression or term actually mean? And where does freedom of speech and expression might get into a dangerous territory?
It's obviously when you are in a specific profession. So usually, or whenever you just talked about anything in a proper context, so there are always, there are norms, tradition and all that. So there are like good aspect of something and there are bad aspect of something. But when we just talk about like this specific area, actually it has marked the line. Now, it's very difficult to define because you all know Haredi said that information does not equal to truth, which is quite challenging now. So, just people, the way they are just taking like disinformation, when in the heart of heart, whoever is going to disseminate disinformation, he has got something negative. So the one who is going to harm the society, the one who is going to harm any particular institution, the one who is going to harm a particular group of people. So the base is basically something negative.
Something negative with an intention.
Exactly,
That
with
person who
intention.
is trying to propagate an information which is not correct.
Correct, exactly.
Which is not true.
Not at all.
He's intending to inflict any sort of a harm on the receiver. Am I correct in understanding what you're saying? Let me bring in Mr. Gilani into the discussion also. Mr. Gilani, what's your understanding? How do you understand that very thin line or that very boundary where we understand that this right of freedom to speech and freedom of expression might get into a difficult or a dangerous territory? Mr. Gilani, can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can.
We can't hear Mr. Gilani. We'll try to reconnect with him. Mr. Bokhari, now, freedom of expression, now, disinformation, that is a term that is also being talked about by Mr. Mial. Now, there are certain definitions as far as the Pembra Amendment Act in 2023 is concerned. So it's a deliberate attempt in order to concoct something which does not exist, and it is intended to harm or inflict any sort of a damage on the recipient. What's your understanding? What is disinformation and how we can differentiate misinformation from disinformation?
It's a very relevant question, but also a complex one. Disinformation, the problem is that on the one hand, there are rules, national rules, as we have them in Pakistan. But on the other hand, there's also the reality, and here I'm not specifically talking about Pakistan. Across the world, in the US as well, in Europe too, in parts of Asia, the criticism that often states and governments try to mask part of the information to ensure that information which is not of interest to them or information which doesn't necessarily push up their agenda is not revealed or is not put out in the limelight. So in that sense, it's a complex subject. Where do you draw the line? As I said earlier on, ultimately, I think more than the state and its institutions, which are of course very important, I think society has to come to terms with this. Because obviously there are certain elements of information, certain bits of information which are very harmful or can be harmful. Inciting violence, from inciting violence to infringement upon family values that are part and parcel of our country, for example. Other countries have their own family values. So then how do you take the discussion forward? And I have been of the view for quite some time that you really need to, if the state and the government wants to make progress in this area, then I think they really need to revamp some of their own institutions and some of their own techniques to deal with information, because often is the case that information sometimes is withheld. I think we've gone past that stage as a world. I'm not talking just about Pakistan. We have recently seen the controversy over VPNs in Pakistan, and that's obviously a concern for the government. The figures that have been put out about growing use of VPN are quite staggering, to say the least. So the question is, where do you deal with this, and how do you deal with this, and how do you make sure that information, instead of using the word disinformation, I'd use an alternative, which is information which is damaging to our national interests, even our security interests, and other areas of...
The information that is damaging to our national interests, the security interests, that is being termed as disinformation. There happens to be the element of intention, the maker, the origin from where that particular piece of information gets its origin from or emanates from, the intention is bad at that very origin. What about the other very terminology that we get to often see along with disinformation, that is misinformation? Somebody who does not have the intention but still becomes a part of that particular network or that particular loop, and he unintentionally forwards or disseminates that information. Do you think both can be treated the same way, or the person having the bad intention has to be dealt in a different way? And if there happens to be a regulation or any punishment regarding that piece of information, and if it is done without any intention of inflicting damage or harm, could be dealt in another way? And if yes, is there any way or mechanism that can help differentiate between the two?
Look, personally, I'm very careful about the WhatsApp messages that I forward to my friends, to other groups. And the reason is that I've seen instances of people, well-meaning people, well-intentioned, and yet forwarding WhatsApp messages without reading them, without understanding their implications. And what this does is, or has done, is provoke quite a backlash from people who would view those messages. So that's one example. And in this day and age, possibly the most relevant example. People would say the same thing about tweets. Don't blindly follow the pack and don't forward either tweets or WhatsApp messages just for the heck of it. But do read them carefully and understand where they're coming from, and not everything is worth forwarding. So that's one. On the matter of disinformation, someone trying to distort information. Look, the problem is also that the day and age that we live in, there are multiple sources of information. Sometimes information can be damaging. At other times, it's information which is not necessarily in the interest of society to be put out. I'll give you one example. Years ago, when I reported the Red Mosque incident here in Islamabad, right here, we had security briefings, which was fine, which is how under such circumstances, countries deal with situations all over the world. So this was not unique to Pakistan. But there were people, and thank goodness back then, neither WhatsApp nor social media was as active as it is today, but there were still people who were putting out information that could have risked the lives of our security personnel. And so the question is, in that situation, I know it's a very unique example and it's a very extreme example, but should, as a responsible citizen, should you be doing something like that? And does the state have the right to come down heavy and to restrict the outflow of information in that situation? There's an example in front of you, and I would, by all means, would say that putting restrictions in such grave situations on the outflow of information where human lives could be at stake, could be jeopardized, I think state has the right to take that action.
So restrictions, the manifestations of those restrictions, what could be the possibilities regarding that particular thing? I'll come back to you. Let me once again go back to Mr. Gilani. Mr. Gilani, can you hear me, please?
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Mr. Gilani, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Now, how do you differentiate misinformation and disinformation? Of course, there is an element of a bad intention as far as disinformation is concerned. There is an elaborate definition as far as the PEMRA Amendment Bill 2023 is concerned. How do you think the perpetrators of both misinformation and disinformation must be dealt with?
Once again, and let me say that I would like to take an example of what happened in UK a few months back. So one fake news ultimately caused a lot of violence, in the country like UK, and loss of lives even. It created a huge panic for a society which is well organized, well educated, and of course they are aware of all these challenges like fake news. But it created a lot of problems. So uh, we need to understand in a country like Pakistan that we have a huge, population of our youngsters, and unfortunately, it's not very easy to identify whether the news that is spread to them via social media, whether WhatsApp, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, whatever it is either fake or it has some true content. So, therefore, I think I would appreciate Jawad, the effort that PTV has made to aware our own society, our own nation, that this kind of things can actually make a lot of damage. So we need to be careful when there is a news shared with anybody, especially youngsters. They need to understand whether it does not violate the independence of their own, independence of the other people, and particularly it's not damaging to the country and society. If this is the case, they need to be very careful. So the thing is that uh, whenever so there is a new technology, there is always a side effect. So I always say the technology improvement and the medical innovation always have a side effect. So this is the right time for our society to start seriously thinking about to include this kind of education, not only in a media like you did. I think this is a wonderful step, but also in our curriculum. One thing I realized, I would like to take the advantage of this forum now, that even the curriculums taught in the international schools has to be reviewed with all honesty. So our youngsters are actually taught what is the patriotism, what is actually the respect of the country and the people living in our own society, in our own country. So we have to take certain measures as a government, as a state. This is number one. Number two is that as this step is taken, we need to understand in media, in print media, there should be debates in society to how to how to actually extract the right fullness of the actual information from the state content, because there's flood of information. It's not easy for anybody, including you and me, and especially the youngsters, to check that whether this news is.
Why isn't it easy to differentiate from the true facts or the right information and the false information? Do you think it calls for enhanced media literacy also that would ultimately develop a cognitive immune response system within the recipients?
I think this is also a responsibility on both sides. One side is the responsibility and the right of the state to ensure that our social media platforms are well controlled, and any such information that can cause an internal violence or threat to the country or threat to the peace within the country must be well tackled. This is number one. Number two, as we are always saying, that we need to create an awareness campaign in the normal youngsters, because what happens, this is a world of technology where the people actually are reading or analyzing our own behaviors through our use of our social media. For example, if somebody would like to analyze through analytics that what I am actually thinking, what is my behavior, what are the areas where I can react, read. So these people actually use this study to penetrate into our societies, into our youngsters. So, of course, on the other hand, then they are actually using our emotions, especially the emotions of the youngsters, by spreading of news like, for example, something which is against our normal culture in the society, then it provokes, the emotions of the people. And here we need to train up our youngsters especially that they cannot take any action which is against the state, against the law, against the other citizens of the country. I mean, there should be some parameters. Of course,
It actually start from by what age that particular training should be imparted to youngsters?
Very good question. And I would say now, what are we doing at home? We are giving this phone to the youngest kid in our homes, unfortunately. So maybe a kid which is say 2 years old, he started using this phone, watching cartoons, etc. So what I say is we should start, educating our kids from primary, even pre-school phase, how to use this social media information, how to extract, what to understand, what to do, what not to do. And this should be part of our curriculum from the beginning. Even I think we should work on our own social media applications where we can have our own cultural or Islamic or whatever it is, our own our own content to be taught to the youngsters, to the kids. I think this is the time to.
What do you think is going to be more effective? That particular training right from the start that you've just mentioned, or a blanket ban up till a certain age, as Australia has done it for the use of social media? It has banned and imposed a blanket ban for under 16s. So which thing is more effective? The imparting of training right from the start or imposing a ban like this?
Because, we cannot compare our nation with Australia, for example, because they have some different dynamics. For example, we have banned many things in Pakistan, but unfortunately, people are using it. So we have to make sure that we are somehow controlling or ensuring that our social media is properly managed, because there is so much content available in video games, also in cartoons, in other areas where youngsters you cannot stop them. Of course, before that, we are watching things on big TV screen where others are also watching. But today, we're watching it on this small machine which has a secrecy, which is a privacy. So I think banning certain information, of course, is important, because till that we need to train our people, our youngsters, in parallel. So we cannot say that do one thing now and leave the other. So we need to do both the things in parallel.
So what about this? How do you look at this particular ban of the Australians for the under 16s to use social media?
You're asking me?
Yes, Mr. Gilani, please go ahead. How do you look at this particular ban? Do you think it's a long-term solution to address the problem?
No, this is not a long-term solution, of course, but this is, whenever you start something new, when there's a new challenge, you have to manage it. So this is, you can say, a thing that is to manage, the challenge in a way that unless the challenge is, properly addressed, the ban is important, because you cannot quickly, because, training or educating people is not so quick. You have to spend some time. You have to prepare certain courses. You have to, work on the curriculum. So during that time, of course, you need to use this technique of implementing ban on a certain age. And then in the meantime, you have all these preparations done, and your kids, your youngsters are being educated. Of course, they can understand. They can be aware.
Tasadduq Gilani is social media analyst joining us on Skype. Thank you very much for taking time out for Views on News tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Mial, now differentiating between misinformation and disinformation, do you think legislation in the right direction could be helpful in, first of all, bringing in a mechanism that would enable us to differentiate between the person disseminating false news or information without intention and the one with intention? And also, I'd like to have your understanding regarding as to implications of the spread of disinformation, not only in terms of society, but also when it comes to the decision making of the policymakers.
Okay, thank you very much. It's like very relevant in this regard. For example, especially when we see in the context of certain events, then it turns out that how it is going to benefit us or how it's going to harm us. Now, unfortunately, when we just look at like one aspect, there is so much polarization. Now, why it's getting in that regard? Because, you know, people are just sitting in their own echo chamber, and they are hardly going to go for this fact check and all that, because I'm talking about all political parties all over the world, okay, and especially in our part of the world. We have got reliable outlets of news. People are not, especially youngsters, they're not moving toward them. And second, now we have got certain these specific people who are just bombarding us with this information. We are not even interested to fact check what they are saying. Rather, we just take as it is, and then we start like sharing it as well. And it gets very dangerous, especially for the Zinka. So one is this echo chamber, all of us, and we are not even willing to go for this fact check. Whether this particular guy, whatever he is saying, is it true or not? Second thing.
Why is that a trend? The youngsters not making a stride to check the facts? Why is
number
that
one
so?
is, especially as Tasadduq Gilani has alluded to that one fact, that when he was talking about like UK's society, still, I mean, there's a concept of research. Okay, in our part of the world, unfortunately, we're just talking like where this debate is taking place. Just see the percentage of the people. How many people are there who are just going to go for this research and fact checking? As Sir has also mentioned very rightly, early in the morning when you just look at in different WhatsApp group, what happens? Like early in the morning, people wake up and they just take it as their responsibility just to pick all the relevant, whether these are videos, audios, or graphic information. I mean, they're going to paste your picture, there's going to be a different message, and then they're just going to, without even going for this check, they're going to send it to. Now, there are, almost 90% people, they are just going to, they will also take it as their responsibility.
So they are going to forward that particular message, what they thought could be spread to a larger number of people without verification of the information or the content that it carries with itself. Does that naturally not call for enhanced awareness campaigns when it comes to, you already mentioned the case of the UK, there is an environment or the atmosphere of going into more research. Unfortunately, over here, you're of the view that doesn't exist. Doesn't that actually also call more for spreading more awareness among the youngsters, also enhancing the media literacy, and also developing subsequently that cognitive immune response system?
Specifically when we just talk about like Australian ban, perhaps the context is slightly different. But when it comes to our country, there are certain things which are really staring us in the face, and they're going in the very wrong direction. So before like it gets like too much disruptive, I think we better handle it right now. Clear? Because
okay,
the way we are going to emotionally charge youngsters.
I see your pardon for the interjection. This is a very important point. When you talk of context, so the things, as what I understand from your take, is the things have been less disruptive as compared to being more disruptive in case of Pakistan, not more disruptive in case of Australia.
Exactly.
Okay, so if it is not being that much of disruptive in the case of Australia, but they are still going for a blanket ban for the under 16s, so does that call for a complete blanket ban over here in our case where it is being more disruptive?
I think like until unless we have just talked about one particular aspect that we need to guide them, we need to introduce it into our curriculum at school, college and university level, and we have got to develop this awareness. So far there's no awareness. They do not know, okay, what is the truth, and the way people are just maneuvered, they are cajoled into certain philosophies, they do not know. So, as naive citizen, recipient of this, whether this is disinformation or misinformation or malinformation, which is going to affect them so if you don't, I think initially we should take for the right mayas in the start, And at the same time, we should start up with these campaigns, especially in the curriculum or developing a kind of awareness so that it's going to work on both sides. So there should be a less harm, less damage to the society. And we have got to, take care, safeguard our youth as well in this regard.
Mr. Bokhari, what's your understanding? Mr. Mial is of the view that people are so naive, they just continue to forward the things without any fact-checking, without any verification. And of course, in this entire process, the maker of the fake news, or the one who is intending harm to be inflicted somewhere where the target is, achieves the target at the end of the day.
What Mr. Mial has said, of course, I agree with him as far as the present-day environment is concerned. As I said earlier on too, that there are cases in daily life of people who blindly, almost blindly, forward messages without checking the content of those messages. So that's a problem. But we also have to understand and appreciate another part of the challenge, which is that 20 years ago, the term citizen journalist was used casually. Today, that is a powerful reality. 20 years ago, the main stakeholders, as far as the messages going out, were regular, organized newsrooms. At least by and large, that was the case. Today, you have large numbers of vloggers, people doing their podcasts. And so the question is, can you really deal with this through legislation or through enforcement? My own view is that if you really want to update your regulatory framework, then you have to involve important segments of society. This is a matter that needs to be discussed in Parliament, and you have to have different players, the main political players, coming on board in support of a new legislation. Because without that sort of broad agreement and some measure of consensus, otherwise, without that consensus, if you just move ahead with the enforcement part, you are, I fear, you might end up witnessing defiance.
Okay, so that's a very important point that you've made. I'd like you to shed a little bit of more light in detail on this particular aspect, the regulation, the legislation, the case of Australia, a complete ban on its 16th for the use of social media. This particular term that you've already used, citizen journalism, and you're of the view that it is a powerful reality. Now, it brings us to a very basic question about the qualifications of what news is and how a news would be differentiated from fake news. Do we understand whoever is a citizen journalist, his piece of information is going to be backed by a strong piece of evidence? Am I correct in understanding that?
Not necessarily, and by the way, it's his or her, because it works both ways.
But there has to be a proof. There has to be a strong, concrete evidence behind that piece of information, what they are disseminating. If they don't have the evidence or a proof, as or what the information minister has said, that PTI has failed to provide any video evidence to prove their claim. So there has to be a substantiated proof of that particular thing, which should be backing that piece of information. Am I correct?
In an ideal world,
when it comes
yes.
to the basics of qualifications of news and of fake news.
In an ideal world, yes. But how will you make it happen in the practical reality of the world that we live in? That is really the question that as a country, ultimately, we have to come to terms with. That's the zillion-dollar question in all of this. And I don't think anyone has so far found the perfect answer.
Mr. Mial, what's your understanding? The presence of a strong evidence to prove that this piece of information is real, it contains truth, it is not having that malified intention, as compared to the qualifications of a fake news.
I think, first of all, like if I'm the recipient, so what about me? What about my level of knowledge? And the way just I receive the information, what's my mindset regarding this? I think all these aspects of awareness, understanding, they play a very important and crucial role just to determine which side shall we take. So I have seen there are myriads of examples where the way it is damaging and all that. I mean, especially when we just look at the people, those who are right now in form of like, previously it used to happen, for example, there is a very established popular media outlet. So if they are going to report any story, and later it turns out that perhaps they were unable to do a proper research and all that, so people accuse them. People said that they lie and all that. Now, unfortunately,
The credibility
currently
was, of
all
course,
these
lost.
guys who have got their own like highly sensitized audience, and they are after numbers, clicks, whether it's in 100Ks, millions, and all that. So that story is very different because stakes are very low. They know that the way they are spreading this misinformation, malinformation, disinformation, they will not be charged for this. No one is going to ask them. So stakes are very low. In their case, stakes are very high. When they share that information, they have got to go take care of. Second vast aspect is that in all established media houses, no doubt propaganda aspect, and we do accept that. Still, I mean, they just go outside, they do a lot of research. But what about these armchair critics who are sitting just inside the room? They do not have any reliable source, and heaven knows from where do they get this information, as if like all the stakeholder of that particular country or particular nation, they are in their contact, and after every second they are providing this information. This is a great challenge which I see, and nobody is going to ask them that how come you got this much sensitive information, and the way with this great ease you are disseminating this information as if you are
So
sitting
you're
with
on
them and
the
all
view
that.
that they don't care that whether they are going to be charged for whatever the wrongdoing.
They know it.
They know it.
They know it.
So does that call for more regulation,
Exactly.
more of legislation?
As we have seen in the case of big giants, here, these all top-notch American companies, big data and all that, what we are asking. Now, this one particular ban, it has developed this debate that, look, we have got to go for the proper regulation of these big giants, data giants, who are right now, they are building their power.
More or less similar sort of words we have seen over here in this case of Australia's ban as well.
Exactly.
From the
so now the
legislators
way
there.
they just, at least it has developed. Similarly, in our context, I think we have got to go for the proper regulations of it as well. That, okay, I mean, we have got to prepare laws, procedures, so that people understand it. Those who are giving this information, they also understand it. And the recipient who are having this information, they also know it. I think it is going to play a very important role.
Mr. Bokhari, regulation, please continue with the point that you are already making. If the people who are making fake news, disseminating that one on purpose, and they are aware that they are not going to be charged for that, does that naturally call for more regulation? And you were of the view that we should bring in all these segments in the strata of the society in order to build that confidence among them also, and to get that legitimacy while making that legislation.
Certainly regulations are important, but regulations can only be characterized as one pillar of a few pillars that you need to create. Regulation is one. Public affairs is very important, that the state and its institutions have public affairs personnel and public affairs sections that are up to speed with the environment that we live in, and that means if that requires inducting people from the private sector, then you go ahead and you do that. That's another important element. And then, as I said, a comprehensive debate in Parliament and consensus across society, because ultimately this is a situation which is going to become, I would hate to use the word troublesome because I don't like the sound of it, but it's going to be more pressing. It is going to be a more pressing issue as time goes by. What will be the next thing to evolve out of citizen journalists or vloggers or other categories of people that we see today who are putting out their messages? And there are many instances of people who've put out messages which were factually incorrect, and yet they continue to occupy the public space without any consequence. So the question is, as a country, society, do you finally come to terms with this challenge and then do something about it? Or do you just accept the way it's evolving and live with the fallout? I would much rather go with the former.
Could the precedents of Australia be applied over here in our case?
Different society, different country. And the nature of the world. The world is a very diverse place, and
but because of the globalization, with the newer media platforms available everywhere around the globe, do you think there is some commonality of challenges also?
There may be lessons that we can draw from the Australian experience, but then there are lessons that we can draw from, and we must draw from other experiences of other countries as well. But to copy paste, for want of a better word, I don't think picking
that you don't recommend. Mr. Farhan Bokhari, senior journalist, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Malik, Asif, Mial, communication expert, thank you very much for your time also for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.